بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Seems to be a tradition, but apologies for the lateness. We had a slight technical issue, which is always a good excuse. You guys hear me? It's on. Bismillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, it's a great honor to be here today. It's the first time I've actually been here. We came from Manchester with Ustad Amjad Mahmood, and a dear friend and brother Bilal Harrison, who does some incredible work with people embracing, or at the cusp of embracing Islam. It's often not very, it's not the kind of what you can promote, or, but it's very, very important work. It's something which you have to be sincere to be involved in, because the outward kind of accolades are not there. You can't, something distasteful in some instances of filming a shahada on Facebook Live. Sometimes something that can be very intimate and private for a person. People are very different. But our dear brother Bilal, a convert himself, does this job exquisitely. So, can everybody hear me okay? I've been told I've got a quiet voice, which, yeah, take that as you please. But if at any point there are some technical issues, you can't hear me, let me know, because I don't want to just be speaking to myself. Alhamdulillah. So the title for the talk is this is always a good start. My understanding, at least, was kind of discussing navigating modernity, and I think it was a great and interesting title, because there's a lot to talk about. I think even, especially with our lateness, I don't know if we have the time necessary to unpack it, but I'd like it to be something of a discussion, if that's okay. I'd like to hear from the audience. But prior to that, I'd just like to share a few things in relation to this topic. First of all, the idea of navigating, that in order to navigate something, you need a series or a set of clear coordinates. And then there's this concept, or there's this, it's intuitive that you're navigating towards something. You don't just wade through something for the sake of saying, going around in this kind of pool. You're heading towards something. There's a destination. And then the idea of modernity is a really interesting one, because often it's seen in the negative, like we're navigating away from it. But what is that it? What is it we're to be navigating away from? And isn't modernity, in all of our understanding, really that which we mean? It's interesting, ironically in some sense, it's not necessarily in the UK, but in certain parts and expressions in the Muslim world, because of various reasons, often a kind of political or social kind of pulse which kind of pervades the entire society at any different kind of various different echelons. But what you have is this idea that religion is inherently backwards, and it's holding us back, it's constraining us, and it's restraining us. So when we talk about modernity, does that mean that our destination is to move away from development, from progress? What do we mean by modernity? What does it mean to be modern? And I think there are many different voices which articulate this in many different ways. Part of our tradition, and in many ways a characteristic of authentic Islam, is that we define things before we explain them, before we discuss about them. We know what it is on a very plain and practical level, what it is we're talking about. The misuse and the upheaval of a certain word and placing it, literally tahrif, the removement and rearticulation of words and placing a different meaning behind it, is in some ways one of the characteristics that we find ourselves in. There are many words that we knew traditionally as an ummah, but now have somewhat been usurped and given a very negative light. I'm sure some of you can think of some of those words. So when we talk about modernity, in many ways it's about being in the present time which we're in. And Muslims were never adverse to that. And in many ways that's one of the kind of governing goals of Islam, to be present and to understand one's context in order to navigate it. But to navigate it back to what? Islam doesn't has nothing to say that we're to all do a communal burning of our iPads and smartphones, and this is not what Islam in any way is kind of proposed. At the same time, that we know we're a tradition of balance, and if the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is one of harmony, then we need to know what it is we're balancing and what scales we use in order to articulate this. Now, something coming, as somebody who embraced Islam, we had the whole convert revert talk this morning. We won't get into that right now. But as somebody, to keep it democratic and neutral, that embraced Islam, I came from a tradition which was, you could say, nominally Christian in terms of ethics and morals and values, but not necessarily practicing. The only time when we'd go to church really would be a wedding, some kind of school function that you may be forced to go into. And up and down the country, English people kind of, fall into some kind of spectrum as very much practicing and completely disinterested. And sometimes, they find religion in its totality is completely repellent and they repel it. But having that kind of acquaintance with religion, the idea of balance, something that very much appealed to me as a new convert some years ago now, was this idea of the Sunnah being this balance and having reference to an authentic balance. Because we hear this a lot, words such as extremism, but in order to identify any sense of meaning of the word extremism, we have to know what's the medium, what's the balance, what's the authentic middle ground. And Islam is not a reactionary religion, it's one which affirms realities and affirms things. La ilaha illallah, it's affirmation, isn't it? So we're not a reactionary religion, and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is reactionary. Meaning what? Meaning the only rhetoric that we hear ourselves speak about, either in a public platform, on media, or on social media, is when people say something that kind of prickles our ego somewhat, we react. That we have a tradition which we fall back upon, which we're deeply ingrained within, and which we use in order to combat this. So one of the signs of a contemporary secular kind of way of being, a default way of being, is that you're governed very much by your context. That your principles can be fluid enough in order to change the rhetoric of the climate, both on an individual level, in terms of one's family, communal level, and even in terms of society. That can change very frequently. With Islam, we're not rigid, but we're also not fluid. One of the ways that Islam has been articulated is that it is like the purifying water which goes over the bedrock of any given land. This is why we see the plethora of beauty and diversity across the Muslim Ummah, and how that's manifested, you could say, culturally, but in many different ways. In order to kind of encompass mankind and humanity, Islam inherently, and the message which the Prophet ﷺ came with, has to encompass that diversity. And in many ways, if we see it the other way around, that the Prophet ﷺ is the only one that's able to, and we said this doctrinally in terms of theologically, that able to embrace all of this diversity. One of his names, ﷺ, was Al-Jami' ﷺ. Al-Jami'. Well, we get many words from Jum'ah, Salat, Jama'ah, Jam', all of these kind of various derivatives, but the Prophet was the Al-Jami', the one that would bring people together. And it's not this kind of process of like, well, we just kind of need to get everyone on the same level and make some kind of manifesto so we all kind of make things a bit calmer in Mecca at the time. It's reconciling at the level of people's hearts. It's mending and healing people's souls, that they have the ability, that they don't perceive their outward environment of something as always as a threat, so they're on the defensive, but they are deeply entrenched in a spiritual and intellectual tradition, that they have the wherewithal to proclaim this profound truth to all of humanity. That's what was embedded in the Sahaba. So the modernity's always been there in many respects. The present time we can define as modernity. I'm sure the early Meccans, the pre-Islamic Meccans, saw themselves as in some way progressive, and characteristics. We know what's best. That's one of the characteristics of that kind of way of seeing things. So we're not adverse to modernity. At the same time, we're people of principle and truth. You could say in many ways we're kind of past modernity. We're in a postmodern era. Postmodernism, one of its characteristics is that many things it's relativized. That you have your way, I have my way, and as long as we don't kind of, headlock, then there's an understanding. And in our current context, in our societies, formally our practice of religion, that's the expression it's going to take. However, what it doesn't do is water down or reduce the profundity of one's belief in the deen and Allah al-Islam, the way of life, the authenticated tradition, religion in the sight of Allah, of God, is Islam. So when we look at modernity from that prism, we understand that we're not looking at only half of the scales. If you take the scales, if you bear with me, I'm kind of thinking images rather than kind of theorizing too much. And so if you imagine these kind of scales, and if you're trying to set a balance on one end of the scales, it's inherently going to be imbalanced. So if we only look to what we see on social media, if we only look to what we see from the political arena, if we only look to what we see as that which comes to us on a daily level in whatever kind of interaction we have with our broader societies, at work, at college, in the doctor's surgery, whatever, we're only seeing one side of things. But we're a tradition, once again, of Jama'ah. So the Prophet ﷺ, not only would he reconcile between people, but he would reconcile individuals. Something that's very sad about a movement away in general from any kind of rooted tradition is this culture of fragmentation. And what I mean by that is it's very hard now not only to belong, but to know who you are. And if you don't really know who you are, any approach to a truth can be relativized, and it can change every 2 minutes. And that's very disconcerting, particularly for young people. Normally when one gets older, married, children, there's a semblance of stability, although we have in this culture so-called midlife crisis. And in some level, one could articulate that as a realization on a deep level of the soul, although it may not be articulated thus with a psychologist. But it's the soul knows that there's something not right. There's an imbalance. You don't have to be Muslim to apprehend this. You just have to have a soul. And as the Arabic poet said, you are human by virtue of your soul, not by your outward body, your form. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala constantly alludes to this in the Quran. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he alluded to this where he said, "Inna Allah la yanzuru ila surikum wa la ila ajsadikum, walakin yanzuru ila qulubikum wa a'malikum." Indeed, Allah doesn't gaze upon your form or your image. It doesn't mean that we don't have a form to our tradition. It doesn't mean we don't have structure. It doesn't mean we don't care, even at the level of our appearance, about the way we look. But it's not that which governs it. It's not just an outward superficial expression. And part of the reconciling of Islam is the way we interact with our context. And what that means is our relationships, our spouses, our children, broader family network, is not just governed on a linear level. We don't just deal with things in terms of our own way of rationalizing things. Rather, it's rooted in principle. We're not, the higher purpose of Islam, in another way of putting it, is not just to be a good bloke, to be a nice guy. It's to be a person that is connected to their Creator, to have an awareness of Him through an understanding and a connection back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As somebody that, as I said, was not brought up as a Muslim, my own personal journey, I wasn't particularly interested in kind of constricting myself with a kind of formal ritualized daily thing to do. I kind of had enough things on my plate, and that just seems ostensibly like something like a chore. I wasn't necessarily in desperate need of a way to live my life, so I thought. But what was of real appeal was this introduction into a different world, a different way of being, a different way of viewing the world, an opportunity to see things from a broader perspective. And it's not just a linear perspective. It's not just having a bit more knowledge, having a bit more information. It's being rooted in who you are. And I'd contend that as somebody that was born and raised not in that tradition, I'm not the only one that has that yearning also. The way we may perceive that from other people could be through foul language, could be through aggression, could be through certain expressions of racism. But a person who's been gifted the blessing of being rooted in this balance has to be able to see beyond the surah, beyond what appears before them. Many people involve themselves in this kind of practice, this kind of way of behavior, is because deep down they're actually hurting. And if you think of it from another perspective, if somebody is genuinely reconciled and at peace, they're not going to feel so aggressive towards anyone. They're just going to proclaim their truth, and it's going to be done with decency and in a peaceful manner. So the Prophet ﷺ came as Jami' ﷺ. And from this reconciliation, an expression of this reconciliation, is he came with a message ﷺ, which intrinsically addressed all peoples at every time, in every place, with all their varying diversities and intellects and worldviews and understandings and varying capacities to understand. All of this through us, until Yawm al-Qiyamah. Pretty big job. If you look at certain ideologies, particularly in the last century, they kind of take on a certain flow, and the hype builds up, maybe to the level that it reaches the kind of the higher echelons of society, maybe even governance, and then we see these things dip and drop. But what we see with the Prophet ﷺ and that which he came is it's only increasing. We had a wonderful experience with Shaykh Amjad the other day, meeting a young man who was interested in becoming Muslim. He became Muslim, he was interested in deepening his knowledge in Islam. And just as we were sat, somebody called Shaykh Amjad to say that they too also wanted to become Muslim. Now, that's not an isolated incident. Dear brother Bilal also mentioned that there were people repeatedly contacting him, interested in Islam. And this isn't stopping. In fact, our dear brother Bilal has decades of experience in this field, and his approximation, this is only increasing. Now, this is interesting because were you to look in the sphere of the media and whatever, you'd think the opposite would be true. But what's happening is when people find this abrasiveness, because in many ways, if you're only approached with a kind of a definition, a one-sided definition, which is inaccurate of what Islam is, it's fitra, it's a natural thing to find that repellent. We'd be worried if the general mass populace of England would, well, I kind of like the terrorism kind of stuff, and I like the way people are getting killed. This would be problematic. The fact that we find this abhorrence to this is a good sign. It's fitra. But what we need is individuals who can be rooted in principle. Because when people come across those individuals and they find that what's actually true is the contrary to that, is then they start to become interested in Islam. So modernity, and this now back to, we've had some reflections on what this means. It's very different because modernity in England it means something very different to modernity maybe in Dubai, to what it means to something maybe in like Hong Kong, to what it means in Sydney, to what it means in New York. It's not one homogeneous understanding. Modernity, and even within those cities, every individual has their own kind of approach to modernity and what this means. We can look at it from a philosophical point of view. I don't want to bore you too much with that, but we go through history. We have the Enlightenment period, which was the kind of, what's seen as the pinpoint where the break away from tradition in Western culture, where people said, religion's really kind of holding us back. We need to think about things perhaps more objectively, and we need to kind of review what we're being told and commanded to do here. And a lot of that was reactionary because there were many instances within the institution of the church at that time, which was highly oppressive. People also saw elements of hypocrisy within that tradition, and naturally the soul repels this kind of hypocrisy. You can look from the perspective of, and this is not to be underestimated, but particularly in this country, perhaps more so than America, 2 world wars, the First World War and the Second World War. When up until this day, particularly you find it more apparently in more rural communities, you'll have murals and all of the potentially even hundreds of people that passed away from these small towns. And that still resonates in the psyche. It was so profound, in fact, that people really felt that was kind of like the last straw in many respects. And I was visiting my grandma, my auntie, yesterday in the rural English countryside. And coming from Manchester, it's a very different culture. It's still very much church-oriented. They have the big churches in the village, and people still go there, albeit someone just for, at some level, some kind of communal kind of engagement. But this really kind of set the precedent. I mean, in Manchester, they'd have, in the Victorian times, it was seen as the most godless city in England, some accolade. They would have in the, so I'm told, the fountains outside of the town hall, instead of water going pumped through the fountains, they said out of fear of cholera, maybe that we'll have to check their intentions, but they had beer flowing through the fountains in front of the main hall. So a very different and strange kind of world. We also have technological advancement. In many ways, the modernity which we're talking about is the information era, where within most people's lifetimes, not everyone's, we've seen the transition from no phone to pages to the Nokia 3210, still going after all these years. At least they had a decent battery. I mean, and then to the smartphone, and now who knows what's next? Who knows what the next 5 to 10 years has, to offer? Now we're not inherently resilient to those things, but we're also once again rooted because we see things as having implications. This is part of this balance and part of this harmony. That which we do, that which we say, that which we type, that which we comment upon, that which we like, has not only an implication to that person's response that we're directly in a linear sense dealing with, but an ukhrawi implication also. We'll be asked about that which we typed, that which we commented upon, that which we liked, that which we, contended with on Yawm al-Qiyamah. And this is part of that balance. One of the challenges that we face also in a breakaway from tradition is that we see that everything that's come before us, there's the potential, there is the voice, that everything that came before us is backwards and we've progressed on, meaning we no longer need it. But if you look from the prophetic voice, once again, and anybody that's attached to that, with Sanad, with an unbroken chain back into him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's a timeless message. There will be certain things which Imam al-Ghazali, for example, in the 1000s, the 11th century, will be referencing. We maybe don't quite get contextually what it means when we heard his stories and anecdotes of kings in castles and moats and knights in shining armor. But the principle is the same. Because the likes of Imam Ghazali, and there are many others of these great traditional scholars, they weren't addressing the context, they were addressing something much deeper, something which is inherently timeless, the heart. It's only that which the heart contains that remains. And this is why in Yawm al-Qiyamah, as we know, the ayah of the Quran mentions that on that day in which neither wealth nor children should be of any avail except that person that comes to Allah bi qalbin salim, with a sound heart. Having a sound heart hasn't become old-fashioned. Having a sound heart hasn't become outdated. The new sound heart, the new season's sound heart doesn't change. And the novelty of the kind of superficial rhetoric shouldn't distract us from this reality, because those principles are still the same. Just as Imam Ghazali may be talking about the nature of backbiting, those rules and those coordinates don't change. Their application may be different. But what we need to be careful of doing is causing a dichotomy and separating between the two, moving away from the tradition. So because it's slightly more technological, we're no longer browsing over a particular parchment from the medieval times, we're looking at a computer screen. Those implications are still real. The principles of how to be a good human being, the principles of how to affect authentic relationships and ties and bonds and love between people are still the same. The implications, were we to say they're not, is to say inadvertently that the Prophet ﷺ is now irrelevant, blasphemous, inaccurate, and we need to be very careful of subtly intuiting these things. The sign of us not feeling this, of having a trust in what the Prophet ﷺ came with, in his timeless message. They say the most timely is the timeless, and the Prophet ﷺ spoke out to all of us from that seat in Medina, when he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ayyuhan nas afshu salam, O people, spread peace. Peace doesn't go out of date, harmony doesn't go out of date. And that's not just necessarily that we involve ourselves in the next kind of UN resolution. We tune in, make sure we're updated on the latest kind of politicking throughout the earth. Make peace in yourself. Spread peace. You can't be a conduit of peace unless you yourself are reconciled. Be a person who's reconciled, who knows who they are, know your potential, know what you're going to. And give food. Be hospitable. Be a kind human being. Don't be inherently reclusive. Be magnanimous. Be generous in the way that you are to people, which is the social component of Islam, which will always remain. وَصَلُّوا بِاللَّيْلِ وَالنَّاسُ نِيَامٌ, and pray in the depths of the night once people are asleep. Meaning, don't think that this linear address, Islam is not just to be reduced to the social. Some great things happening over the last number of years, homeless feeds and the like, but it doesn't stop there. It has to be rooted. It has to be transformative, and the only way that will truly impact people if it's connected to a higher purpose. Everything that we do, every word that we speak, every letter that we type has an implication. Why are we doing it? Who are we seeking? Who do we want to be close to? There's an eternality to everything that we do, although it's caged ostensibly in the temporal and the spatial. When I say a word, it's gone, but it has an eternal implication. So modernity, navigating our way through modernity. So to go back to the Prophet ﷺ, to learn about who he is, to learn about what he did and does, to learn about ﷺ, his teachings, from those people that have an unbroken sanad back unto him, those people that have embodied that tradition in their character so that it's transformative and transforms others. Does anyone have any questions? Any of the sisters? Easy crowd, huh? Put you all to sleep. Sure. Absolutely, yeah. Okay, give me an example. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What, social media in particular, or just how do we? Okay. I mean, the tradition that, my understanding of things is not a balance between being kind of Islamic or not Islamic. That's not the balance. Those aren't that's why we have to understand what the scales are. And I know that's not what you're saying. Also, the idea that modernity inherently means a kind of a certain manifestation of liberalism. It means that we do whatever we want. Modernity can mean many things, and that's one of them. And that's often where Muslims from traditional kind of contexts may feel that kind of abrasion with modernity. Modernity means liberalism. But in the likes of social media, you have the Prophet ﷺ, as we alluded to, you have principles in dealing and interacting with that. In the essence, if one has a good intention, it doesn't go outside of the broader realms of the sacred law, then social media can be used for great purposes. Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's an interesting point. Yeah, I understand that. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Sure, yeah. Okay, yeah. Right, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you've got to be practical about these kind of things. Potentially, I mean, I think, that's a huge topic. But I think definitely the nature of the time, it doesn't necessarily govern the way we are, but it has an influence, and that's the navigation part. We need to know how to navigate. And the how-to is the people that really understand their tradition. So maybe you could say characteristic of the ages, everyone has to have a stance. What's my stance on this? What's your stance on this political, what's your stance on Brexit? What's your stance on it? And that's on the assumption that you have to have a stance, because you're placed in a very small niche that, well, if I don't have a stance, I'm irrelevant, or I'm not engaging with society. But as a Muslim, we have a broader spectrum of the way that we view things. I think practically speaking, one of the things particularly within this country, and I've seen this the world over, there comes a certain age where those the parent first and foremost understands the perimeters, but also once those have been passed on to one's children in a way which is wise and gentle and encouraging, and sometimes explaining some of the reasons, sometimes not, but you have a relationship with the child. I think even within English culture, for example, the role of a father, less than 100 years ago, definitely, but let's say 100 years ago, was quite far removed. They didn't have the kind of, but the way the Prophet ﷺ towards children was very different over 1400 years ago, very much involved. And one of the sayings of Ali, the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, was that, after that initial kind of incubation where they're taught and they're given those principles of 7 years, that you actually take them as a friend. And many young men, particularly, they don't necessarily need like another rule book placed in their heads. They need somebody that they can confide in, because everyone is trying to work it out at some level. And part of working out is having that trust in an adult, in an elder that you can confide in, and be genuine and not be judged by. It's really difficult to do. People need to be allowed to make their own mistakes within a particular kind of construct. A lot of these things are built on principles, because if you talk about modernity, as you alluded to, that's definitely something that could never end, because you go into technology, and then you go to what types of technology, you go to what extent to this technology. And you need to talk in terms of principles. Sometimes if we get involved also in the peripheries, we lose the essence, because the peripheries are there to distract us. If you get rooted in the essence, connection back to Allah, understanding who Allah is. You can't connect to something you don't know what it is. You can't connect to the Prophet when you don't know anything about him. Learn about him. One example is also to make things fun. It depends on the age of children. I have 4 boys, but they're all quite kind of young. I'm not going to be speaking to them the same way as I would like a 14 or a 16 or an 18 or a 20-year-old. But you've got to, things have to, and we're all deficient. I mean, it's not an easy task to be a parent. But, to the best of one's ability, you have to lead by example, because children learn from what they see, that not necessarily what you tell them. Please. Mashallah, yeah, that's a great question. Really, really important one, particularly in the context of schools, colleges, universities. The first thing would be to know the tradition yourself, because often what can happen is people can, it's the idea, when you're in an aeroplane, how there's like in pre-flight movies, so like make sure you put the air mask on yourself before the child. Now, it feels counterintuitive. This is my child, like, how can they fend for themselves? But you're going to be of no use gasping for air, Same with the life jacket and so on and so forth. So that as an analogy is really important, because often people can kind of very well intentionally go into murky waters and end up drowning because they don't know how to navigate it. They don't know the tradition themselves. And that's not necessarily, reading over a pamphlet and then going in kind of wholesale. It's a continual thing. It's almost like an apprenticeship. It's going back and having recourse back to sound scholarship, to teachers that are qualified and you can trust. Because there'll be things which come up that, well, I didn't hear that in the fiqh class or whatever it is. But you have that kind of basic grounding, and then there'll be these kind of things which, that particular niche will require recourse back to sound knowledge. And I think, the essence, many of these things, and I don't want to kind of undermine it, there are intellectual components to it, there are academic components to it, but a lot of the time we misread it because it's based in emotion, or it's based in something much deeper, like the heart and the soul. People feel, isolation is one of the great symbols in many ways of modernity. People feel isolated. Even if they're amongst people, they don't know how to be with people. Maybe that partially is caused by on social media and our inability to have a human exchange in a meaningful way. These things are being eroded. So we need to give people a lot of breadth. And sometimes, it's really about knowing what our narrative is. And I'd say that was a really important part to the general theme of today's discussion, navigating modernity. What are we navigating to? Is this something we even need to navigate? Is it something where it stands as a dichotomy between our belief? Not necessarily so. Sometimes it's just being very real with people. In Leeds, they just take people out for a burger and hang out with people and spend time with people. And if you're lucky, you might get a coffee. But if this is done, and people aren't stupid. Intelligence, if we only view it from an academic perspective, it's really kind of reducing what it means to be human. Most people are very intuitive and have like a real, what they may term emotional intelligence, but it's an intuition of the soul, like a basira, firasa. People can see when someone's being genuine or hypocritical, and when someone is being kind, and their only agenda is, to help that person, to care for that person. Those kind of things have a profound effect on people, And sometimes you just got to let certain things slide. A lot of the time when we're engaging with people will say things they're trying to assert themselves or what they're convinced of. And we need to allow people that space. Sometimes it's best just to re-navigate the conversation. And then also, if somebody has a genuine question, we don't just play a game of diversion. We're able to answer it. It's done in an amicable way. The Prophet ﷺ and all of the Anbiya were not charged to argue. They would have they would debate billati hiya ahsan, in a way which is beautiful, in a way which was effective. Sometimes if you go into it's the analogy of fire, you can't fight fire with fire. And sometimes I'm on truth, therefore let's fight. It doesn't work like that. You need to be able to, like certain martial arts, the skill is to go into the punch. And that's, once again, it's counterintuitive, but that's tarbiyah, that's the prophetic training. That's what the Prophet came to do. The lady that was moaning the entire time on the way out to Mecca, and the Prophet ﷺ was carrying her luggage. This old lady in the streets of Mecca. Imagine this, you're in the streets here, and some old lady, and the Prophet intuitively just went to help her. He didn't say, well, are you a Muslim or not? What's your kind of, beliefs about the EDL? What are you into, I don't think they had the EDL in Mecca in those times, but they had their equivalent. I mean, these are archetypes. These are archetypes. Just as we can find an example in the Prophet, there are many Abu Jahls, there are plenty of Fir'auns, there are plenty of Nimrods, and we need to be careful of that. And that's why Rumi was really interesting, because he was saying, don't abstract it to something which is distant. Look to the Pharaoh within you. Have you dealt with that yet? Look to the Abu Jahl within you. Have you dealt with that yet? Only when you reconcile that are you going to be able to effectively deal with people in a broader sense. So she, the entire time she was talking about, there was this man called Muhammad, and he's just ruining our, kind of ruining our culture. He's come with something new. And then this whole kind of thing. And the Prophet ﷺ, because sometimes the reaction from an place of ego is kind of like, well, actually, let me just assert the truth. And that's not necessarily what's most effective or most prophetic, because the Prophet, he didn't just kind of cast out knowledges. The methodology of how to espouse and how to convey, how to teach that knowledge is integral to the knowledge itself. So it's not just random sound bites of information. How you learn this information. That's why we're always reminded by our teachers about having adab when we're learning sacred knowledge, because it will only sink into the mind, into the heart, and become transformative in that which we do and our character and our behavior, if it's taken in with certain characteristic traits. So this lady, she was walking, the Prophet just listened, and she was talking about, obviously he didn't tell her who she was. Then in the outskirts of Mecca, you can imagine, like, oh, what a lovely young man. She probably didn't say it like that. I don't think they had that accent in Mecca in that particular time. But these are archetypes once again. When Deirdre or whatever in the road has the same, oh, she's just some racist white woman. Maybe that's just her experience of the world. Maybe it's our opportunity to change that. So the Prophet says, bid her farewell on her way. And she said, like, you've been so kind, what's your name? And he said, Muhammad ibn Abdullah. She was like, no, well, you're the guy who's just been whinging about the whole time, you know. And she ended up taking her shahada. Subhanallah. That's incredible. And I mean, who here is a convert stroke, revert stroke, has embraced Islam? MashaAllah, we've got one. Two, wonderful, subhanAllah. The sisters are always overtaking, mashallah. It's a great accolade to them, mashallah. And you'd attest to that too as well, so that's worldwide, subhanAllah. Incredible. For those people that, and I know sometimes if someone's born into the tradition, but you can re-engage, which is very profound as well, because it's all guidance from Allah. But just for those people that have, and I'm reminded to myself, because even as converts we can occasionally get complacent, don't underestimate the power of what that means for somebody, the transformation. It's so amazing for somebody literally to change their worldview and belief system and lifestyle. And it's funny, I was at my auntie's yesterday, and I didn't realize, because normally she's got cats, so cats are cool, but she had this dog, new dog. I was like, oh, I had to be there. It's always the case. And when I became Muslim, we had three dogs, and it was kind of like flashback. It was like anti-nostalgia, just seeing this dog at the door. And the dog, it wasn't too friendly, which is always a bonus. But these kind of things, I mean, those are small things, but it makes you really remember about those, early days of becoming Muslim and how much has to be done. And it's an amazing process. Because you're doing it, it's rooted in belief, it's rooted in, I want to please Allah, but it's not without its challenges. And don't underestimate that, the power of Allah to change. And that's the thing, that whatever age we live in, whatever society we're in, Allah is still Allah. He's the living that never dies. And if you call upon Him, He'll answer you. Allah promises that in the Quran. Call upon me and I'll answer you. وإذا سألك عني عبادي فإني قريب. Many of my servants ask you, O Muhammad, ask you about me. Because in the Quran, وإذا سألك يسألونك, they ask you, O Muhammad. That's why you get the some of the translation, if O Muhammad doesn't say that, but it's سألك, and when they ask you, the implication is to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They ask you about the Penfound, they ask you about this. قل, say, that, say whatever needs to be said. Obviously in accordance to the context of the ayah. This is the only example in the Quran when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي, and if my servants ask you about me, فَإِنِّي قَرِيب, indeed I'm close. I'm close. Not say I'm close. And there's a rhetoric here to say, not even say I'm close, I'm close. Like instant. Jalla Jalala. So there's a time where there's there are challenges, whether we're at school and dealing with people with various ideologies. But often I find these to be like a plaster, covering some kind of something deeper going on. And we just need to have prophetic character. Know we're not the ones that can change anything. It's only Allah that can change anything. And we take the means and we pray for people and we have good character, But why are we getting into these kind of, things? Is it for the sake of Allah, or is it to kind of bolster my tribe? I'm from the tribe of Islam. I'm going to defend it. Islam doesn't need our defense in that regard. We need to. It's a very subtle thing of exerting oneself to one's absolute in service of Islam, whilst having complete reliance and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the way we'll be able to navigate through these things. Any more questions or comments? I mean, it doesn't have to necessarily be a question. But be careful, that's why I use the last 10 minutes for asking you something. Yeah, please. Yeah. Okay. Mm. 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 Yeah. I was wondering who was going to bring that particular one up. Alhamdulillah. Inshallah. An important question nonetheless, and one that does need to be asked and one needs to be discussed openly, because we could, all too often, and it's from a good place. Muslims are like, well, let's defend this and let's have my stance on this and see, how I can requote a misused ayah. But it's not necessarily what the vast tradition and body of scholarship would say or how they would articulate it. And once again, the idea of being prophetic in the way that we do things. Once again, I think it goes back to the individual, before we look about how we can contour the broader spectrum of the Muslim community, quote unquote, in our country or in the West or globally. We need to look to our own selves. That thing which is, the saying which is attributed to Rumi, its meaning is true and its meaning is beautiful. Allah and the veracity of it. But yesterday I was clever, so I decided to change the world. Today I'm wise, so I've decided to change myself. And that idea of being a clever clocks, well, intellectually, my reading of the current social climate is great, but is that prophetic? If it's not redundant, then you're standing solo. You're not doing things in a prophetic manner. We need to be very careful of using Islam to bolster our own egos and that which we want to say, placing an ayah of the Quran or hadith behind us. It should be the opposite way around. The profundity, and we have such a trust and certitude in the divine message, we don't need to worry about these things. We place our egos behind that. Now, articulating that, people are in different rungs of society. Some people are able to be influencers in that regard, and they should be specifically trained in how to address politely, amicably, effectively those kind of issues. And for those that are not, then we always have dua. People say, "Oh, I want something more practical." What could be more practical than asking the only one that can change anything? Once again, the idea of balance. We've got to be careful of seeing things from a secular perspective when inherently we're a faith-based tradition. That's what Islam, the first rukn is ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. It's a matter of belief. So people that have those kind of expertise, they get involved. I think a lot of the time we just need to show what we are. I mean, so much. My brother had a really interesting point. He's not Muslim, and he said some time ago about what he felt. And he's very amicable, and he's not adverse to Islam in that sense. But his reading of a lot of the kind of stuff on social medias, Muslims can be very reactionary and defensive. So a lot of the time, it's not necessarily, our narrative shouldn't be like, well, Islam isn't this, Islam isn't that. Because people are not really inspired by that, and it's not really authentic to our tradition. What is Islam? And that's not necessarily something that can even be articulated verbally. It's something which is practiced. And the only way we can be Islam, as an ummah and really uphold its merits is to do those things. So to choose our narratives of sorts, what I'm trying to say. There are certain things which in our current context we're not able to affect. It doesn't mean we allow it to get out of hand, but only if we have the capacity for influence in those regards and we're trained and versed in that kind of thing. But first and foremost, we know our own tradition. So we're able to, the Prophet ﷺ went out without kind of, we are a tradition which believes in the end times and a slow degradation of an erosion of tradition and traditional values, normative ways of being. But the Prophet ﷺ, he said, if you're planting a sapling and Yawm al-Qiyamah commences, the whole proceedings, this epic, day, keep planting. Because then the reason ultimately why you should be doing it is your intention behind it. Why are you planting? You're planting for God. You're not planting necessarily to see fruits. Allah's the one that causes the fruits. And that plant may be just within your own vicinity. It's articulated in another narration where the Prophet said, فَعَلَيْكَ بِخَوَيْسَةِ نَفْسِكَ. You should take care of your own self. And that doesn't mean wow, that's a bit easier, then I don't have to worry about anything. I just become a hermit and just head for the hills. For some people, that may be a reality. But what's meant here is this is part of the coordinates also for that expression of the end time, is that you are an effective influencer in that which you can genuinely influence yourself, first and foremost. For example, if you're not convinced your own self, you're not going to be very good at convincing anyone else. So how is your own iman? How's your own certitude? How's your own belief? How's your own understanding of the tradition? And then those people within your vicinity, your family, your children, spouse, friends, so on and so forth. It's once again the balance is not to be apologetic, that we have there's a way to convey certain things. And I think many people in our society, whether it's on any issue, I'm speaking very generally now, and everything I've said is very general, but many people are looking for certain principles which they can adhere to. And what we need to be very cautious of is, in the name of everything being okay, what you get is almost like a totalitarian liberalism. So it sounds freedom, but it's actually, well, only our form of freedom. And Islam traditionally was, you can see this in expressions in the late Ottoman Empire, where you'd have Jewish courts, you'd have Christian courts, almost like a small individual countries within a country. That's part of the fluidity of that, magnanimity of that tradition. Anything from the sisters? No. Yeah, please. Yeah. Okay, sure. When Sayyidina Mu'adh ibn Jabal went to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet sent him to Yemen. And this is somebody who had frequented the company of the Prophet ﷺ for years and had a profound understanding of the religion. But part of their humility was, was to always go back to him, always have recourse back to him. So when, in his parting words, he actually wept because the Prophet ﷺ alluded to the fact that he wouldn't be seeing him again. He'd have passed away before his return. So he started to weep. And then he said, Ya Rasulullah, what do I call them to? We need a methodology. And you could say, well, I kind of get the gist. We've been, I've been spent time in your company the last X amount of years. I can kind of, give it a pop. But that wasn't the way of the Sahaba. It's everything, Allah wa Rasulun a'lam, Allah and His Messenger know best. Allah and His Messenger know best. So they said, Ya Rasulullah, what do I call them to? Profound question. If you think somebody, imagine if somebody, let's contextualize it a bit. Somebody spent years in the company of one of the most, world-renowned scholars of the age, training, day in, day out. And then he goes to his teacher and says, what do I do now? It sounds like, well, I've been teaching you all these years for, but it wasn't taken like that. It's a form of, of genuine humility and constantly seeking back to that source. The Prophet ﷺ, what he did, he gave a methodology, and it's from that blessed question we're privy to that. He said, call them to Allah. Sounds like a simple thing, but often the barriers which we place, you have to have a political stance about a certain region, may be very important, but it's not necessarily central to, belief or disbelief in God. You have to dress a certain way, you have to act in a certain way, you have to have a certain affiliation with a particular culture. All of these kind of things are not central. The Prophet, he didn't say, well, they're Yemeni, you've got to make a kind of Meccan kind of vibe. Call them to Allah. By implication, in a way that they'd understand, in a way that they would resonate with them. Because you're not calling to Allah as you're just speaking up here. Keep things very simple. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he said, and then if they answer you, like only when this happens, it's a priority in dawah, then call them to the prayer, call them to that wonderful ritual which binds you and reaffirms your connection back to Allah 5 times a day, those meetings with Allah 5 times a day. And then only when they answer that, when that's been affirmed, then call them to this, call them to this, call them to this. Now, maybe if we go and, and just speak to people, have you ever thought about God? Depends, different kind of communities approach that in a different way. Where I grew up, it was kind of taboo. God was a taboo. You wouldn't speak about God. It kind of be slightly embarrassing to speak about religion, which is part of that we spoke about at the beginning of, a whole heap of baggage over the last century or so. So you've got to resonate with people. Where are people at? If you're speaking on an individual level, it's just about that power to connect with someone. Because you can't call someone to something if they're not even listening to you. So to have that resonance, and that comes from a place of care. Once again, people's hearts, it doesn't matter if you're Muslim, not Muslim, people have hearts and they can recognize someone that's genuine, sincere in their care for people. And sometimes that might actively not speaking about religion at all. Maybe just going out for a cup of tea or coffee and just having a good time. Because it breaks down a lot of those barriers. She or he is kind of like me. And, they like what I like. And you can build that familiarity with them. It's all about relationships, And then in their own time, those things, people have a thirst, not to be necessarily overly shy about, she asked me about religion, I'm not going to go down there. How's the coffee? If they ask about this, and that door is open, then you start to speak to them. And the person that's calling to Allah should be the most intuitive of people to recognize when those times are, because it's not prescribed. You may think, maybe on the first meeting. I was in New Zealand recently, prior to what took place 3 months ago, and it was really profound. I've not had something happen like this before, but there was a man waiting in the middle of the square in the center of Wellington, which is the capital, and we looked at each other and we sat down. And I've never done this before. It's almost like anti-dawah, because in terms of what I would learn in my own experiences would put someone off. But just something that came to my heart, and I said, "You should become a Muslim." And he said, "Yeah, I should become a Muslim." And it was so strange, but we had a great day together. We had some fish and chips, not as good as the ones from Manchester, but these sacrifices you have to make in the field of dawah. But we had an incredible day together. And subhanAllah, sometimes that's what people need. So it's not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, but just to see, dawah is calling someone to God. قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ. Say, this is my way, I call to God, not to an identity. It's a very subtle thing, but as Muslims, because we have to in some way, or we are in some way conditioned to any greater or lesser extent by the societies we live in, whether we apprehend it or we don't, that we wear Islam as an identity. I'm not this is how I project myself outwardly. But how far has it been internalized? And we can only meet someone in that way. I'm not calling someone to an outward semblance of Islam. I'm calling someone to God, first and foremost. And kindness, that's another example. Like the same things, the way the Prophet would do things. Khidmah. What he was doing to the old lady was khidmah. He was just serving her, taking her bags and helping her out. How many of us have done that in the last week, in the last month, in the last year? Just seeing people and having such a care for people whilst trusting in Allah. It's not like, I don't care if you become Muslim or not. What a strange thing to say. Of course you do, else you know nothing about the tradition. How could you not want that kind of beauty and good for that person? But no, there's a difference between you doing that and thinking you're the one in control of it. For me, that was one of the most appealing things about Islam. And I know my father, who alhamdulillah also became Muslim, feels the same. It's the way that it's not preaches and wait a minute, let me try and convince you. My nafs is already saying you ain't going to happen. But this kind of slight removedness and trust in Allah whilst having a beautiful, And there's many things in this society, as I'm sure you know, that now curry is always a good start. Can't get more English than that. Seriously, joking aside, I'm sure Bilal knows, I know people that have entered Islam over a decent curry. Because they have to, subhanAllah, and what over there. As a convert, as English, we grew up, you go for your takeout on a Friday night, whatever it is, like family treat kind of thing. Then you go to a Muslim house and experience genuine pakora. And it's like, subhanAllah, where have I been my whole life, subhanAllah. Although it was a bit heavy in the first Ramadan to have that 4 o'clock in the morning for breakfast, but that's another story. SubhanAllah. Stick to me frosties. Yeah, alhamdulillah. It's just about being real with people. Making sure you're topped up as well. You're not running on empty. A lot of the time we're kind of you know, the Shakespearean phrase, methinks thou dost protest too much. You know, we're not giving down to convince ourselves. We need to be connected back to those people who are connected, who illuminate us, you know, should be running on empty, and, you know, have trust in Allah. It's all about Allah. It's all about, you know, and it's so wonderful to see when Allah affects that change in someone. You know that you have nothing to do with it. Just to see Allah's hand in action is just incredible. It's a great blessing. Allah grant us tawfiq. I'm concerned we're 7 minutes over time. Shaykh Tanwir, Fadlan. Everyone's asleep, which is some kind of success. Yeah. Yeah. You have permission. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sure, absolutely. On that note, some of the most moving thing, like experience in my own life, has been through when you read children's books or when you try and explain something to a child, because it's not convoluted and there's no false pretense. Because they'll be like, "Don't get what he's talking about," and you have to like simplify things in a way which is just real, because kids get stuff which is real. So obviously, books are a great medium. There's some really good works out now, kind of revised. It depends obviously on the age range. There's some kind of reworking of some of Imam Ghazali's. It's not. I don't think it's an Imam Ghazali book, but it's wonderfully illustrated. I can try and get. I don't know if you have like an emailing list here. Something? No. Yeah, maybe we could try and get some things together. Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. And you just got to make things very simple. I mean, something that my teachers have often recommended is like stories. I mean, who doesn't like a good story? There's a reason why cinema is so popular. You know, the entertainment industry, people love stories. You know, because at the end of the day, as human beings, we can get principles and we can get theories, but it's not that which is going to inspire us to action. Like, oh, you guys were half asleep for the first hour of my talk when I talk about the old lady. You think you're all like, oh yeah, I get that, and that's just the way it is. You know, and that's why the Quran is full of stories. That's why the Prophet ﷺ was sent. So we didn't just get, well, the Quran is, you know, these rules and principles and crack on. You know, it was embodied in that human form. So you can see, that's what it means. And when you see the people that follow in his footsteps and connect to his way, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it just all kind of culminates and works. It doesn't really need an explanation. So stories about the prophets, really important. And attaching to them, to the people of Allah, to the great, you know, people of God, men and women from this ummah. Bedtime stories are always a good bet as well. I've always really loved bedtime stories, and it's good to, you know, whatever they've experienced during the day, that kind of last thing, you know, and before they go to bed is what resonates. You know, you have to be a bit more animated and stuff. It's strange because as a parent, you kind of you have to be entertainer, breadwinner, you know, a number of different tasks all within the house. And sometimes it's not, it's you know, this is a thankless task. But when you see that child connect, and, you know, and a lot of the time, and this is something that's very different from where I live in Hadramaut. A lot of the time, unfortunately, I think it's part of us trying to navigate our way through modernity, and you know, the kind of waves and the onslaught of friction which we often find ourselves in. Is, as Muslims, we're only about do this and don't do that. Muslims should do this. You shouldn't act that way. And that doesn't resonate with an adult, let alone a child. And the way of, you know, that I experience and the people that I've been very blessed to spend time with, and their teaching is always to connect things back to the reality, which was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, instead of saying, well, you should do this after you know, meal, because then it just becomes like the kind of thing I grew up like. After your meal, you put your knife and fork together. Don't leave it. They said, don't stick your knife out. Like basic manners. That's not adab. Adab's far more profound. it's far more rooted. It's connected to the unseen. It has otherworldly implications. And so if you connect it back to the Prophet, why are you doing this? This is let's do what Rasulullah used to do. You know, I mentioned before, like sometimes we're all guilty of it, but you leave a bit on your plate. My boys will get into a bit of a habit of doing it. So we had this thing about like Rasulullah would make his plate completely clean, and some of the people you see it in the older generation in Tarim is they would always pour a bit of water after they'd wiped the plate clean and drink the water. So it's like there was just out of appreciation of the blessing. And so I told it to my boys, and the middle one, he comes up to me and he goes, Baba. I said, yes. He goes, look, I've got Rasulullah plate. That was really sweet. So now we call it Rasulullah plate. As in, like, this is what he used to do, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And you've got to make these little things, these connections back to him. Islam is not just a kind of severed series of rules. It's inherent, it's coordinates, which allows to navigate into the divine presence ultimately. Alhamdulillah. Inshallah, we'll try and get some books together. It's something that we need to work upon. I mean, we're hardly saturated by it. And I think it's something that, mothers are typically very good at. So mothers should do it as well. And even it doesn't necessarily need to be published. They have recourse back to scholarship. People approve things. Put something on a blog or something, with like morals. Sometimes kids don't get the details. They just, so the moral of the story is 1, 2, 3. Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know of anything specific, but I'll try and find out. And the challenge also for, my own case, just being a teenager, is that transition from childhood into adulthood. And you could say one of the symbols or one of the signs of modernity, which is different from a traditional worldview, is that is really blurred. There's no kind of rites of passage. So sometimes you get these kind of like 40-year-old kids because they've never really made that move into adulthood and responsibility, and what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. We're probably far more well versed about our rights, but not that very illiterate in terms of our responsibilities. And there's, I think, another thing, there's literature, but also community projects to get young children involved. One of the things that Shaykh Amjad is involved in a project called Clemency House in Greater Manchester, in Oldham. And it's not necessarily sitting young people down, talking to them about, in a classroom setting, about the deen, because they're all going to be falling asleep, or there's just not going to be that resonance. But they do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So young men particularly need that physical exertion. And if you tick off those boxes, they always kind of seal it with a kind of a gentle but poignant reminder. There are many examples of this. Young people, they need to get involved. They need to feel a part of something. And I think part of that estrangement is just nothing to do. Okay, you can tell me I can't do this or watch this or act in, but what can I do? I think one of the signs of authentic scholarship is whenever they would navigate you away from something, they'd always give you a wonderful replacement. I'll give you an example. Like, you become Muslim, like you have to give up Christmas, but you get 2 Eids. Bonus. My boys were really impressed with that when I put it that way. So yeah, just a lot of it's about the sloob and connecting that to the people of knowledge and practice, inshallah. Tayyib, inshallah. Shaykh Tanwir, forgive me for taking your time. Sorry for depriving you all of Shaykh Tanwir. No, the du'as on you, Sayyidi. La, khalas, I've spoken far too much. Jazakallah khair. Ameen. Ameen.
Jazakallah khairan. Thank you so much for coming down. And apologies there's an interruption there. The children had to go home, so they finish at 3:30. So apologies for an interruption. But Allah yazikum al-khair. And we've recorded it, so inshallah ta'ala we'll share it with you guys, inshallah. And thank you to Shaykh Hamdid for bringing the opportunity to us. Allah yazikum al-khair. Thank you. It was supposed to be dinner, but alhamdulillah, it's turned out to be much better. So that's it. Du'a's done. Du'a minki ya Sayyidi. Fatiha ya Allah. Musab ya Allah. Bismillah ya Allah. Just a Fatiha. Alhamdulillah. Shall you return back? Inshallah, Shaykh Bilal can come back as well, and next time maybe together, because Sophie, when she became Muslim, one of the ideas that came to my mind, I was traveling to Umrah on the same day, and her friend, mashallah, both of them together, Allah bless them, get to the same schools, and so I was really fortunate to sort of give the Shahada. And then I said to myself on that day that, khalas, because of you now, the idea was there, sort of in the mind, and you would conversate with yourself about trying to get packs for the converts and revert brothers, those who embrace Islam. It's probably the safest place to be. Just on that note, which one do you go? Bilal, which one do you go with? So there you are. There you are. Alhamdulillah. Okay. So you go with convert. We back together where sort of had brothers and sisters donate and some money, and alhamdulillah we put them together. We'll get them checked by yourself, inshallah ta'ala, now. Inshallah, if you would kindly agree to it. So inshallah, maybe we can get you back, and you guys, inshallah, something specific and private for you guys would be great. And inshallah, it'd be nice to have that with curry, alhamdulillah. Curry, alhamdulillah. So we're free to go, inshallah. Thank you very much. Jazakallah khair for coming.